Every city block has its stories, but some walls seem built for legend. On East 71st Street in Manhattan, two adjoining townhouses became unlikely co-stars in a tale of politics, scandal, and reputation. At number 9, Jeffrey Epstein entertained princes and professors in the house that came to symbolize secrecy. At number 11, billionaire Howard Lutnick, now the US Secretary of Commerce, kept his residence. The wall between them, once an ordinary party wall of brick and plaster, has been recast as a portal in the public imagination, a conduit for surveillance, a thin barrier between innocence and implication. It was Lutnick himself who revived the mythology. On October 1st, he told a podcast audience that Epstein was the greatest blackmailer ever. He recounted a single visit next door, a tour of a massage room, a boast about the right kind of massage, an impression of hidden cameras. With that anecdote, he did more than tell a story. He seeded a narrative. Proximity became his credential. He was close enough to know. Disgust became his alibi. He was distant enough to be clean. And the wall became a prop, evidence of adjacency, and at the same time, the reason Epstein might have spied on him. This is the oldest function of myth, to elevate the ordinary into the architecture of fate. A simple wall becomes a witness, a shield, even an accomplice. But myths conceal as much as they reveal. What if there were no secret passages, no endless web of cameras? What if the greater danger lies not in surveillance tapes, but in ledgers, transfers, loans, shell companies that don't fit neatly into the spy story frame? By foregrounding cameras and blackmail, Lutnick primes the public to expect tapes. If only financial records appear, the myth has already softened the blow. That possibility points to the deeper logic of Epstein's rise. From the beginning, he was not just a social connector, but a financial operator. He built his fortune by managing, and sometimes controlling, the wealth of the ultra-rich. The standard account of Epstein's power rests on the myth of kompromat: hidden cameras, recorded liaisons, whispered threats. That myth is useful because it diverts attention away from the harder, drier, and more consequential reality: finance. Epstein's real value to the elite was as a mechanism for moving, hiding, or legitimizing wealth. Oversight regimes exist for single actors. Regulators can scrutinize a company for self-dealing, demand disclosure of insider transactions, or audit the accounts of an individual billionaire. But Epstein's genius lay in recognizing that power multiplies when two or more billionaires interlock their networks. With reciprocal control, any movement of funds can be reframed as a legitimate business transaction. Transfers no longer look like laundering. They look like investment, loans, asset sales, or charitable disbursements. Les Wexner was the first pillar of that system. The founder of L Brands, and once one of the most powerful figures in American retail, Wexner was Epstein's earliest and most prominent client. In the early 1990s, he granted Epstein sweeping financial authority, including power of attorney. Epstein managed Wexner's fortune, sat as a trustee of his foundation, and ultimately took possession of his New York mansion. That relationship gave Epstein not just money, but also legitimacy. A billionaire's patronage opened doors, silenced doubts, and disguised transfers as routine stewardship. Wexner's network became Epstein's launchpad. And all Epstein would need was a relationship with a billionaire, not managing his money, but kind of as a friend, bringing him opportunities. So he started looking where they lived. From there, the scheme scaled. Money flowing from one billionaire's account to another's offshore entity is nearly impossible to distinguish from ordinary investment activity. When the same actors appear on multiple boards, trusts, and partnerships, transactions blur into the accepted noise of global capital. Regulators cannot easily call it laundering when every transfer carries the veneer of business. A triad connects past with present to explain why the rich and powerful have been so worried about Jeffrey Epstein. First, the billionaire network, beginning with Wexner, expanding outward, until ordinary business masks extraordinary flows of money. Second, Epstein's business veil, a structure where transfers between controlled enterprises appear legitimate. And finally, the blackmail failsafe, a scandalous cover story that makes the public expect tapes, not ledgers. Was that the ultimate selling point for Epstein's scheme? That anyone who came looking would be so distracted by his sexual predations they would never realize it was all a money laundering scheme? In this frame, Epstein's reputation as the greatest blackmailer ever is not revelation but camouflage. It explains away the inexplicable. How a man with no visible company could handle billions, receive unexplained payments, and shuttle assets across borders. It channels scrutiny toward the improbable and away from the likely. It also provides a ready-made explanation for any trace data. He spied on everyone, while distracting from the hard reality of cross-border finance. Being remembered as a predator is catastrophic for one man's reputation, but far less threatening to a system than exposing a clandestine financial network that may implicate banks, sovereign funds, and politically connected billionaires. Lutnick's recent comments, then, read less as confession of conscience than as inoculation. By telling a controlled anecdote, yes, I was next door, yes, I saw something strange, he creates a public record of proximity. By professing horror, he certifies his morality. And by reinforcing the blackmail myth, he shifts the frame from ledgers to cameras, from money to salacious rumor. If his name later appears in a financial file, he has already ceded the explanation. Epstein watched him without consent. Any trace is incidental. Any payments were mere business. This is not whistleblowing but a rehearsal of defense. It is a classic reputational vaccine. Disclose a fragment of truth, express disgust, float a theory, and position yourself as an observer rather than a participant before accusations surface. Because Lutnick is not merely a financier, but a Trump confidant and cabinet officer, his performance also functions as a signal to others in the same circle. Prepare your myths now, before the archives speak for themselves. Modern myths thrive in the spaces where evidence is absent. But unlike legends carved in stone, this one rests on paper. Deeds, transfers, powers of attorney, and bank wires waiting in archives and regulatory files. The story of Epstein as the greatest blackmailer ever may shatter as he is revealed as the greatest money launderer ever, with his client list in the hands of banks, not the FBI. Either way, the wall on East 71st Street will remain, a mute witness to the myths built in its shadow.